guys can have a seat if you would. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning, Lewis. Good morning, Austin. Good morning, Miss Joy. How are you over there? You good? It's good to see you. All right, I need some help today. I need a lot of help today. So I'm glad that you're here because I need some parenting help. Paige and I will tell you, we are just trying our best right now with our kids and just trying to do some things with them, raise them up well and raise them up right. Most of you know that Paige and I have two boys who are 8 and 4. Okay, so if you are the parent, or if you're a parent and you have elementary age kids like Paige and I do, will you raise a hand real quick? You got elementary age-ish kids. Okay, I see you in the back. Thank you, sir. All right, maybe you're a parent and you have older kids who were once elementary age. Will you raise your hand this morning? Okay, got some more people. Great, I'm going to need you. Okay, maybe you're not a parent just yet, but you've observed someone else's elementary age kids, maybe at a restaurant, birthday party, Thanksgiving dinner, just somewhere out in public, you observe someone else's elementary age kids. And if you're not fully, sure what an elementary age child looks like, they're about yay tall. Will you raise your hand? There we go. All right, I see you. Thank you so much. Full room participation. That's what I need right there. Okay, here's something that I have learned in our relatively young parenting journey is that our kids are always, and I mean always, in constant need of something. Always, all the time. Even when I know that they're fully taken care of, right? And that they could not possibly be in want for anything. They will come to us and they will ask for something. And what's funny and yet equally frustrating is a lot of the time, they don't even know what that something is that they want. They just know that they want something, and they'll look at you with those big beady eyes and they'll stare into your soul while their brain is just searching for a word that they can latch onto and then just kind of spew out at you all the time. There's like this never-ending asking from them of what they want or what they need. Dad, can I have this? Mom, I need that. Can we go here? Can we do this? It's all the time. Like, we would have just finished breakfast on a Saturday morning, and us Bowdens, we go hard at breakfast on Saturday mornings. We do bacon and sausage and eggs and pancakes. We protein-packed, starch-filled, all right? We're going to get all of our week's worth of calories in one meal on Saturday mornings, what we try to do on Saturday. And I promise you, no less than 30 minutes after we eat all of this food, it's me and the boys, right? Lewis will come up to me, Dad, can I have a snack? I'm like, dude, there is no possible way 15, 20 minutes removed from what you just finished eating that you could want or even need a snack right now. Am I the only parent that has experienced this phenomena? No, okay, so I'm not crazy. Is that what I'm hearing? This is completely normal as a parent of young kids. All right, great. Thank you, Drake, for that affirmation, okay? Appreciate that. Here's where I have to be careful, though, as a parent. And this is what I'm learning as I'm learning how my kids are in need. This is what I'm learning as a parent, that I have to balance a proper reaction and then subsequent action to all of their requests and all of their wants. Because how beautiful is it that they just instinctively know to come to us with their needs, right? They just know to do that, and they're learning what it is to ask. And they're learning how it is that mom and dad responds. And church, I don't get this right every day. I'll be honest and transparent with you. I mess this up more than I get it right. I feel sometimes like where I don't respond well. But I want my boys, I want Austin and Lewis to know that no matter what, no matter how poorly timed it may be, no matter how poorly communicated it may be, I want them to know that they can come to me with their wants and with their needs, and they can express that with honesty, and they can express that with whatever emotion that they're going through in that moment. It's my role as dad, it's Paige's role as mom to then lovingly guide them through that moment of need or through that season of wants, right? And this doesn't mean that I'm always giving in to their requests, but I'm providing for them what's appropriate, what's most appropriate at that moment. And it may be different than what they wanted or what they expected, or maybe the timing may be different, or maybe the source may be different. Hey, bud, I know you asked for Chick-fil-A tonight, but tonight you're getting Dollar General frozen pizza, okay? And you know what? You're still getting fed though. Wins, all right? It's okay. That's my role as a dad and Paige's role as mom to know how to navigate them through that season. Well, in Exodus chapter 16, where we're going to pick up our study today, we get this beautiful picture of God acting as the good father that he is to his children Israel. And over again throughout Scripture, we see how God promises to provide for his children, and he delivers that. And then simultaneously, over again throughout Scripture, we see the people of Israel struggle to trust that the Lord's going to provide. All right, and while it's so encouraging to know that the Lord is provider and promises to deliver, the tension occurs for us, church, when what we see in our present lives actively and presently doesn't look like what God has said. A tension occurs in that moment when what I see happening presently in my life today doesn't seem to match what it is that I've heard the Lord say. A perfect example from our time already in Exodus is this. Hey, Israel, I'm going to rescue you out of Egypt, and I'm going to rescue you out from slavery, and I'm going to deliver you to this land, and this land's going to be good. This is the land I'm going to promise to you. I'm going to set aside for you. It's going to flow with milk and honey. You're going to live free. You're going to be my people. I am going to be your God. We're going to commune together. This is going to be great. Let's pack up. Let's move out. Israel, I am taking you out of this bondage, and I'm going to deliver you. And then in Exodus 16, they open their eyes, and all they see right now is a vast, desolate wilderness. Hey, God, what I'm currently seeing right now in my life isn't quite matching what I heard you say just yet. Maybe you have experienced something like this too, where you know the Lord has promised to provide for you. You know the truth that you have read in Scripture about how the Lord is faithful to keep his promises, and he's going to provide those things that you need in your life. Like, he's going to be there, but your present circumstances are kind of making you doubt a little bit. And it's in those moments, it's kind of often in those times when those circumstances causes fear or causes worry to creep up, where our natural flesh response to that is to grab control, right? Because we think, all right, if I can just take control, and if I can be in control of this situation, then I can get myself out of this problem. And if I have control, then I can eliminate this fear or eliminate this worry that I'm living with right now. I need control. That's what I need. And that's a lie. Because control is not an antidote to fear or worry. Trust is. In fact, control accelerates fear and worry. We got to be able to give that back over to the Lord. So as we dig into Exodus chapter 16 this morning, as we continue to follow Israel's journey, what we're going to see from Moses and what we're going to see from the children of Israel are two different responses to a shared reality. I don't think we give Moses enough credit. He was just as much walking through the wilderness as the people of Israel were. Right? And he was no more in control of their circumstances than the rest of the people. But his response to not being in control and daily walking just like them was a response of trust. He was, God, I know you're with us. God, I know you're powerful. God, you've already shown yourself to be faithful and true. God, I know that you are trustworthy. You're in control. You got this. God, I trust you. Israel's response over and over again, shared reality, different response. Their response was one of fear, and that fear produced in them this need for them to take back control. And as we study Exodus, if we were to kind of pan out as a church and just look at the entire narrative of the book of Exodus together, we could pull this thread out that you see cover to cover, that the Lord's ways is something that we see all throughout this study. The Lord's ways are better than our ways, and they're different. Like, we know that his ways are better, but they're also different. And you and I, we had the benefit of being on this side of Scripture, being able to read this story from this vantage point, right? And we get to see Israel's response to that when they're confronted with the reality that God's way is different than their way. And then it's also better. Here's a quick snapshot of context before we start reading our verses for this morning. It's been about a month-ish since the Lord had miraculously delivered them out of Egypt. And they're looking out in front of them. They're looking straight ahead, and they're looking and they're, okay, God, you've taken us from this place. You brought us to this place, and what I see right now is a vast wilderness that we got to get across. They're looking out in front of them, and what they see is a wilderness. Their resources are running out. I mean, everything that they had packed up, all the supplies, all the provisions that they had put in their packs, on their animals, in their carts, it's starting to get low. It's starting to run out. The food that they had, that they packed up, it's becoming crumbs and scraps right now. And when they look out at what's ahead of them, what they see doesn't look like provision. What they see in their present circumstance doesn't look like that they're going to have what they need to survive. And because what they see doesn't look like what God had promised them, what God has said to them, what do they start to do? Well, as Pastor Ricky taught last Sunday, hey, they start to complain. They start to grumble. They start to question. Hey, God, how are we going to eat? God, how are we going to survive this? How is all of this going to work out? Hey, God, you know what? I got an idea. How about we just turn around and go backwards, because at least we know there was food there and the living conditions were less than adequate, but we're going to eat. We're not going to starve. Hey, group poll, can we all turn around and go back? Fist of 5 here, everybody. This is kind of one of these moments where Israel's like, God, what are you doing to us? And maybe you have had a similar question in your life. Maybe you're going through that right now, where you're looking at what's happening in your family or in your work or just in and around you. And like, God, what on earth are you doing? What is this that you brought me to? You look out in your life, and in your wilderness, what you see is a lot of questions. God, how are you going to provide through this? And for us, it's in those moments of uncertainty. Point number 1 for us today, if you're following along in your worship guide, if you're taking notes, which I hope and encourage you to do that, write some things down today. Point number 1, our response and our posture to the Lord during those moments is to look up. We should look up. All right, I want us to read Exodus 16, verses 4 through 8 to kind of see more about what this posturing looks like and why. So let's read Exodus chapter 16. We'll start in verse 4. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out, and they should gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. And on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. And so Moses and Aaron said to all the people, at evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you grumble against us? And Moses said, when the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him, what are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but it's against the Lord. Okay, I don't know if you picked up this or not as we were just reading through that. There seems to be a little unrest in the group. Seems to be a little bit of a disturbance, a little bit of a grumble. I find this part slightly humorous in that if in a room with this many people in it, if 1 or 2 or 3 of us were to start to grumble or complain and be vocal about that, Daryl, we would hear that, right? I mean, we would recognize a little bit of that unrest. Can you imagine 2 million people all at once in one collective uproar, just all yelling at Moses and Aaron? I couldn't imagine this scene, but I think this picture right here is so awesome when you look at the totality of their journey so far. Think about where they've come from to where they are today. They were enslaved in Egypt. They had plagues that led to their deliverance. The Red Sea divided its waters, and they walked across on a dry bed. They have a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day leading them. And now, here in this wilderness, as far as they can see at least, right, it's just desolate. And I want you to think of this as like the Sahara Desert, where it's just rolling sand dunes kind of thing. It's not that kind of wilderness. There would have been patches of grass here or there. There would have been a shrub or 3, okay? And I think what's important to recognize and remember about the environment that they're in, the actual outdoors that they're in, there was at least the possibility, the potential for them to maybe grow some crops, plant some seed. There at least in that environment was the possibility for that. But remember, right, their resources, they're running out, okay? They're not able to provide for themselves. What they did have is pretty much all but gone. And even if they had seeds, Jenna, if they planted those crops and waited, they would have starved to death before any of those things grew to maturity for them to be able to harvest, right? So they're looking at this situation of like, God, we are going to die. How are we going to get through this? They are 100% powerless to provide for themselves, which, side note, if we're all being honest here, right, when we get to a place of being 100% dependent on God, that is the best possible place for us to be. However, it's in those moments where our flesh kicks in, where we begin to worry and we experience fear and anxiousness starts to overwhelm us, where we forget all the good that the Lord did for us yesterday and last week and last month and last year, and we begin to drown in this unknown of today. And it was in that moment where God promises to provide. And while we know this to be true, it is so hard to remember when you're living it, right? But Israel could not see how it was that the Lord was going to provide for them. Because their resources were so limited, they forgot this all-important truth here, that their limitations has no effect on God, right? Like, God is not affected by our own limitations, thankfully. Thankfully, what I bring to the table doesn't dictate whether or not he's able to provide a miracle or not. God says to Moses, hey, you guys are hungry? How about this? I'll just make it rain bread from heaven. How about that? Does that work for you guys? Do you think that'll make the group happy? I'll just make it rain bread. Can we think about this? This is a real live version of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. It is going to rain food from the sky. How awesome is that picture? Now, I bet when the people heard this, they thought it was absolutely absurd. Like, you're going to do what? There's no way. They had every reason to believe that God would yet again supernaturally show up and provide. They had experienced moments of his provision already, and they can look back. They could have easily looked backwards not all that long ago and remember how God supernaturally provided for them so that they could, in this moment, listen, so that they could be confident. You and I have the ability to look backwards in our life and look where God was present, look when God showed up, look when God delivered for us, look for when God, in a moment of need or in a moment of desperation, in a moment of want, where God stood there with us, he was present with us, and he showed himself to be true. We can look back at that so that in our current wilderness, we can be confident and courageous and bold. But Israel didn't do that. Instead, they focused only what was out in front of them instead of posturing their hearts and their minds upwards to the Lord. How would God respond to this? Right? How would he respond to this sort of rebellion? Instead of responding in wrath, God instead shows mercy. He promises to do something out of the ordinary and in extraordinary fashion. I mean, when was the last time you saw it rain food? Okay? When was the last time you walked outside? It has rained a metric ton this summer. When was the last time it rained this summer and it was bread falling from the sky? We haven't seen this, at least not in my lifetime, right? And as often as God, and as God has done so often before in their journey, he does this here again. He provides, but he provides in very unexpected ways. And they started to gather up this food. They started to go out and they started to gather this bread, and they ate it, and they tasted that it was good, and they tasted it like, I don't know what this is, but this is good stuff. And they called it manna, which literally means, what is it? They had no idea what to call it. They had it tastes a little bit like a honey wafer. I don't know. It's sweet. It's good. They didn't know what it was, but they knew they liked it, and they knew they wanted more of it. Have you ever had a dish like that? Like maybe at a potluck or at Christmas or somewhere where you get a plate of food and you're like, honey, I have no idea what any of this is. I can't identify a single distinguishable food here, but it is great. Anybody experienced that before? A few years ago, I was in Belize on a mission trip. And on one of the days at lunch, one of the locals came up and he had this platter of barbecue meat on a stick. And me, being the Georgia boy that I am, I see barbecue meat on a stick, and I'm like, sign me up, I want some of that. And I start to eat said barbecue meat on a stick. I'm like, this is really good stuff. What is this? And he looks at me and he says, it's gibnut. I'm like, that's great. What is this? It's gibnut. I'm like, I'm from South Georgia. What is this? He's like, it's jungle rat. I'm like, hang on. You mean to tell me that this barbecue meat on a stick that I'm eating right now is a rat? He said, yeah, big rat, real big rat. Dude, that's the best tasting rat I've ever had in my life, and I wanted more of that rat. It was so good. If you want to hear more about the gibnut rat in Belize and how it's such a delicacy there, check out our blog tomorrow when it drops. Here's what I knew. I didn't know what a gibnut was, but I knew when I tasted it that it was good and I wanted more of it. That's what I knew. Israel didn't know what this manna was, but what they did know was that it tasted good and they wanted more of it. Psalm chapter 34, verse 8 says, and it calls us to taste and see that the Lord is good. God was giving them food to satisfy their bodily needs, sure, but God was also reminding them, I am a good, good father who cares for his children. You can trust me. I am good. God's way is better than our way, but it's different. It's different. Here's where we got to be careful. I'll put this up on the screen for us this morning. We got to be careful not to miss God's provision because we're looking for it to come in a different sort of package. I wonder how often we miss God's provision for us because we don't recognize the method and the means by which it comes to us. Or worse, maybe God is giving us provision, but we see it as a problem instead. And instead of receiving that provision, we discard it, we send it back because we think it's a problem. And we sometimes fall into this trap because we don't always recognize and remember that God doesn't deliver and provide the ways in which that we often think that he will. Sometimes it's very odd and unexpected. The classic example of this right here is this point. Praying for patience, right? Dangerous prayer. Dangerous prayer. Okay, God, I don't know what is happening, but this has been the worst week of my life. Everything that could go wrong has blown up. My word, everything at the house is broken. Dishwasher doesn't work. The yard's flooding. Job right now, I could quit tomorrow. It's so bad. People are just, oh my goodness, Lord, I've been praying for patience all week, but I've been praying for you to help me be, quick to listen, slow to speak. And God, I have messed this up this week, Lord. This has not been my week. What is going on? I've been praying for this. And God's like, and I've been giving it to you. You just expected me to supernaturally somehow make you the most, gentle, slow to respond kind of person. No, I've been giving you opportunity so I could grow that character in you. You wanted patience. I gave you opportunity to grow in patience. Dangerous prayer, by the way. I tend to look at it this way. God, instead of praying for patience, I want to pray for grace and mercy. Right? God, help me to be gracious and merciful. And I know it might be the same thing, but I just hope to believe that the circumstances change just a little bit, right? Don't miss God's provision because you're looking for it to come in a different way. Israel never had a reason to doubt the Lord. Don't apply your own limitations to how he may meet your needs. God provided manna. And in these next few verses we're going to read this morning, he gives us some very specific instructions on how to gather this provision. And this would be a pivotal moment for the people of Israel that will be referenced back to over and over and over again throughout the Old and New Testament. Manna will become an important symbol of God's provision to his people. And when it comes to provision, in this case, God providing manna, point number 2 for us today, is there are no leftovers needed. Now, I will say, Lola and I were talking earlier during sound checks. Man, there are some times where leftovers just hit different, right? Where I would almost argue on some days that some leftovers are better as leftovers than as, the main dish. But we can't talk about that this morning. I can't get too distracted on the food conversation. But in this case, why aren't leftovers going to be allowed? Why can't they just store up some stuff and hang on to it? And why can't they take this really, really good tasting, delicious manna and just have it for a while? Here's why. Because God will teach his people that his manna is both two things. It's satisfying, but it's also sanctifying. He's going to grow these two understandings in his people. Let's read verses 16 through 20, or verses 17 through 20 together. And the people of Israel did so. They gathered some more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. And each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moses said to them, let no one leave any of it till morning. But they did not listen to Moses, and some left part of it till morning, and it bred worms, and it stank. And Moses was angry with them. All right, let's talk real quick how manna is first satisfying. In his instructions, God tells his people, you're going to get up every day. You're going to go outside, and I want you to gather up enough food, a portion, an omer for you. Gather just enough. And an omer was exactly what one person needed. Don't get too much. Okay, now keep in mind why this is a big deal, okay? We got to get on Israel's level, okay? Let's keep in mind where they are. They're in the wilderness, okay? They look out, they see nothing, okay? Keep in mind what they have. All of their foods that they brought from Egypt, scraps and crumbs. And now the Lord's telling them, hey, here's some food. Just go get enough for today. Just get enough for today. If I'm them, I'm like, no. I'm going to get enough for today and probably tomorrow and as much as I can hoard in my knapsack over here. Like, I'm going to get as much as I can get. The Lord's telling them, no, just enough for today. And to help grow this in his people, God set up some boundaries. God set up some boundaries in that if you take too much, all right, whatever's left over at the end of the day, whether it's from gathering too much because you wanted just a little extra stash just in case, or maybe what you gathered, you ate and you were full and satisfied and there were some leftovers, whatever the reason, whatever's left over at the end of the day is going to rot and it's going to stink and it's going to have worms and maggots. It's going to be gross. Why would God do that? That doesn't seem really nice. Here's what God's trying to do for his people. He wanted them to trust in him that as they woke up and as they went out the next day, that there would be new manna waiting for them each and every day. Each and every day. And what I appreciate about this scene here is God wouldn't just let the leftovers just simply disappear. Now, that would be too subtle for the person who is trying to hoard up, a whole lot of food. There's always that one person, right? You got mystery bags in the freezer that you don't know what they are. They've been wrapped in tinfoil and in Ziploc bags for the last 7 years, and you can't remember. I don't know what that is, but I got it just in case, right? Just in case I got this thing. God's like, yeah, no, we're not going to have that. And the next morning they wake up and it is absolutely rotten and think about this. When you pick up the trash cans after the trash runs, right, and there's that little bit of garbage that got left in there because it didn't get fully dumped out, and it's been baking in the hot Georgia sun all day long, and you get it back close to your house. Scott, you know what I'm talking about, right? And you open the lid, and that it hits you, and you're like, whew. Yeah, that's what that good, delicious tasting manna turned into at the end of the night going into the next day. That would keep me, for sure, from trying to hold on to some of that for the next morning. That's what the Lord was doing. He's trying to teach his people a new way to understand provision, that each and every day you're going to have to trust me. And then from our 30,000-foot view here, this seems pretty straightforward, no big deal. But when we get on ground level with these people, when we get on the same plane as the people of Israel, let's remember who these people are. They had their whole life just about is a life of producing and maintaining crops. They were farmers. So, and when a farmer harvests, they harvest everything, right? When you harvest a field, when you harvest crops, you don't just leave some of it here and you take it all. You get as much as you can, you store it up in barns, you hold on to it, you ration it out, you want to make it last so when the seasons change, when food gets low, you have some resources there. I tell you this because I want you to understand that the Lord's instructions to Israel also wouldn't make sense. Like, what do you mean just get enough for today? That's not what we've been practicing for the last, 400 years. Like, we're good farmers. We know how to do this, Lord. And he's like, no. I'm changing it. Just get enough for today. Tomorrow, you'll go out and you'll do it again. And the next day, and the next day, and for the next 40 years, God provided every single day exactly what his children needed. Not just to survive, but to flourish. It's fulfilling. But his manna also sanctifies. Later in Moses' life in Deuteronomy chapter 8, we read this as he's reflecting back on this time in the wilderness. You shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. And he humbled you and let you hunger. And he fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. As the Lord is teaching them to trust him every day, he isn't just feeding and filling their stomachs, he's also shepherding their hearts. His daily manna was just another reminder of his love for them through his salvation. They did nothing to earn this. That's what's so good. They did nothing to earn this and receive it. They received it completely apart from their own efforts. They had to trust God for it, and in doing that, they got to experience God's love for them in it. Did they get it right every day? No, they messed it up. In fact, in their failures, in light of their failures of God's blessing here, they teach us some important patterns of destructive behaviors. Let's look just real quick. We're going to go fast through these. Three little patterns for you just to be aware of. Little checks and balance here for you of destructive behaviors that lead to destruction. It starts with disbelief. Verse 20 says, they did not listen to Moses. Disbelief is a hard issue, okay? Disbelief's a hard issue in that it's hearing truth from the Lord and knowing that this is truth, yet intentionally believing a lie instead. God, I know what you said is true. I believe and recognize that you are the source of truth. However, I want and I am choosing to believe this lie because I like how this makes me feel right now. And I am going to exchange truth for a lie. Disbelief is a hard issue. But disbelief then breeds to disobedience. Some people left part of it till morning. This is the dangerous part of drifting that Hebrews chapter 2 talks about. Okay, so Hebrews chapter 2 opens with this warning. Therefore, we must pay closer attention to what we've heard, lest we drift away from it. Okay, what have we heard? Let's reference all of Hebrews chapter 1, which is an entire chapter with no commands. The entire chapter is only about the supremacy of God's Son, Jesus. So all of chapter 1 is about who Jesus is and what Jesus has done, who he is. And you get to chapter 2, and the writer of Hebrews says, now because of that, let's be careful so that we don't drift away. That drift carries us from an inward disbelief to an outward manifestation of disobedient action. It's dangerous. And from disobedience, it allows for decomposition. Verse 20, it bred worms and it became foul. What this is in the heart of the believer is a slow and constant eroding of your personal holiness. I've said this time and time and time again that the single most important gift that you can give anybody is your own personal holiness. And this disbelief that then breeds to disobedience is a slow erosion to your personal holiness. You become spiritually foul and weak and vulnerable, susceptible to sin. There's a brother of mine. I love this man a lot. He has been instrumental in my life and in our students' life. He has this saying, take a day off, get eaten by a lion. Like, hey, you take a day off from pursuing the Lord. You take a day off from actively pursuing your own personal holiness, walking in the righteousness of the Lord. You take a day off, you're going to get eaten by a lion. Satan is a present enemy, real, present, a lion seeking whom he may devour. So Frank, how does all this in Exodus work for us today? How do we make sense of this and connect it to us today? I'm glad you asked. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, I don't want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and they were all baptized into Moses and in the cloud and in the sea, and they all ate the same spiritual food, and they all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. The message in Exodus chapter 16 is so abundantly clear that God will provide for his people. And as we look at this story of God's provision from heaven, this manna, it shows not just that God will provide for his people and for us practically, but this is a foreshadowing of how he will and how he has provided for us spiritually. As a good father, God promises to provide for each of our needs, but also he promises to provide for our greatest need. And man's greatest need is a Savior, period. Manna is a picture of Jesus, the living word, the bread of life, the provision from heaven. As we look at Jesus on the cross, we can be confident that God will provide for us by the provision given to us in his Son. What is that? The provision of forgiveness of sins. What is that? The provision of salvation, the provision of eternity with him in his glory. Not because of who we are just complainers and grumblers, but simply by God's grace. And even though your circumstances may evolve and change over and over again, what we know to be true about God's manna, the bread of life, his Son Jesus, is this, that Jesus is never not enough. No matter what you may face in your life, Jesus will always and fully and wholly satisfy, and anything else that you try to put in its stead will come up short and leave you wanting and hungry for more. Jesus is never not enough.